Hi. So I guess we are live right now. I'm going to, just introduce our podcast to our audience. So hi there, future builders. Welcome to On Air. That is AIRE, our labs podcast, where we will dig into the messy, exciting, and absolutely crucial question of how learning and work are evolving in our changing world. I'm your host, Fatima Zara, and today we are kicking off with a conversation that I've been really excited to have. Picture this, you're a brilliant kid who has learned to navigate complex family dynamics, manage a household budget, and lead your younger siblings through homework, all while maintaining decent grades. But when you walk into a traditional classroom or job interview, none of that counts. Meanwhile, AI is changing how we work, and we are still measuring success with the same old yardstick in academia. So something's got to give, right? So that's exactly what we are unpacking today with Dr. Jed Blanton from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Dr. Blanton is doing some fascinating work in kinesiology and sports studies. But what really caught my attention is how he's thinking about mentoring, motivation, and preparing students, especially those from marginalized communities, for a future where the rules of work are being written newly by artificial intelligence. In the first section, Jed, can I call you Jed
Yeah,
on this podcast?
please.
Let's start with something that feels both obvious but also important: your work with students who have often developed incredible skills outside of the classroom. We're talking about kids who have learned leadership through sports, resilience through adversity, and communication through necessity. But here's the thing: as AI and automation become more and more real, literally like in every job market, how do we make sure that these students don't get left behind because their resumes don't look traditional?
Yeah. So, how do we leverage AI to help kids with these leadership or what we often call life skills or social emotional skills? Um, and in the space that I work in with primarily high school kids in sport. So, I think I might come at this from two different perspectives because I do most of my teaching with college students who I hope are in our department are headed towards the medical profession, are headed towards allied health professions, and will often become affluent leaders in their communities. And for many of them, especially our students from rural communities here in Tennessee, many of them dream of going back and being those community
Mm.
leaders and providing healthcare. The population I work with in my research are high school kids, or at least that's the focus. But what we've found is that we are supporting high school students, but probably educating coaches, and that might be where the bridge is between my research and my teaching. Is um, while the focus is always on young people and how do we make young people's experience in sport better, it's educating the adults. And so when I think about my college students on their way to being leaders in their communities, allied health professionals, they're also going to be the ones coaching little league and helping their kids get to soccer practice and um, make meaning of these sport experiences. And so I think AI can play a really important role in both what like a coach might do to prepare for practice, how a college student might understand research and literature, all the while maintaining an ability to be hopefully critical and thoughtful about the AI as a tool and not AI as the product or the genie in a bottle that's going to have all the answers. Um, so I think in the college classroom, talking about AI is super important. What I've noticed with this generation of the traditionally aged college student, they've grown up in a world where they've always had high speed internet. That's never been um, a new thing. It's just the way in which they live. And so I don't think that there's been a lot of critical thought about it as a tool. And I'm not blaming, I'm not
Mm.
trying to be an old man like criticizing the younger kids, but it's just always been there, so they don't think about it, right? It's just where they go. I mean, even my kids, I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and they've known the word Google as a verb
Mhm.
since they were born, right? And it's my wife and I's fault because we use it as a verb, but they don't think about what it's actually doing. So one fun thing I've done in my classrooms is there's this little word sort of math riddle game that I've played with my students, and by and large they figure it out in about 5 or 10 seconds. But when you
Mm.
ask AI to play the game, it hasn't yet gotten it right on the first answer. I don't know how much more intelligent it's getting, but that's been a huge light bulb moment for them to go, oh, this thing makes huge mistakes in really simple problems. And I hope that's been sort of a critical incident for them to rethink what it can and cannot do and how we can leverage it without short circuiting the learning that's possible. And so to try to bring this all back together with coaches and college students, looking at what AI can do and what it can't do
Mhm.
is really important. And for the work that I'm really um, focused on at leadership, life skills, social emotional learning, what we've seen is this is incredibly dependent on the relationship that a supportive adult forms with a young person. The depth at which, in one project, the depth at which one kid, the depth of which high school students could describe what social emotional skills they had learned and how they transfer to other contexts out of sport was linked with the quality of the relationship with the coach or the adult. The kids that, as you mentioned, were maybe learning these skills despite negative relationships, despite challenges or adversity, it wasn't nearly as in depth, and it was anchored in this negative critical experience. And so AI can't, is to my knowledge, form a positive relationship and be that person. So I think these adults, the college students, we're training to be these leaders in the community. If they can use AI to become a learning tool to support how they might organize a practice or something, but not short circuit the relationship, I think that's super important. And the last thing I'll share is a project I wasn't involved in, but my lab did it while I was in school. They, this huge in-depth case study in this large youth sport program in a, a city that's been struggling for decades, and this particular sport program primarily serves marginalized and underserved kids that are on free and reduced lunch, the whole nine. Probably 2,000 kids in the city, and they had the administration nominate coaches that they thought were like some of their most effective coaches, and they also shared some coaches that were they consider needed help, least effective coaches. All the coaches that were nominated as the least effective in the study did not seem to possess leadership and life skills themselves. They would cancel practice without communication. So now you've got, you know, 29-year-olds showing up at a park with no adult. They were harsh and brutal. And so if we fail to equip adults with these important skills, they're they're going to be in places of authority and power in their communities, and they're probably going to act um, without those life skills, which then doesn't provide the youth a role model. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I feel like it's this whole world that kind of, to me, is front and center in my classrooms.
Absolutely. I mean, that's such a critical point. And here's what's fascinating to me. You mentioned leadership, you mentioned social emotional skills, um, communication, resilience. I'm trying to summarize like what I have been hearing.
Yeah.
And these kids from, marginalized communities who will also become the leaders in their communities in the future. These are exactly the skills that experts are saying that will be more valuable life skills, as you said, as AI handles some of the routine tasks. Um, but let me push you on this. So, what happens if we keep ignoring these informal learning experiences? Because what you said is a lot of the times these are not part of the curricula, even at like the university where we teach, right? So, what is the cost to these students? And honestly, what's the cost to all of us if we keep ignoring these informal learning experiences?
Yeah. Let me start my answer by sharing two biases. One, I went to my undergraduate degree was a liberal arts education and emphasis on the liberal, like pretty far out there, curriculum and space, which I'm incredibly proud of. And the second bias is I just finished listening to the book Range by David Epstein, and so when I was in college, there was often some frustration with the courses that I had to take, or that I shouldn't say the specific courses, but the categories of courses, particularly the upper division liberal arts classes. Um, but some of those classes have become the things that I remember the most, that had the least to do with my career. And this is where the book Range comes in. And a lot of experts, a lot of these leaders in their fields, like Nobel Prize winners, et cetera, they possess range versus specialization. And I think our college curriculum and a lot of universities, I think, tend to focus so much on a graduating student getting into graduate school or having a career when they leave as a measure of success, failing to recognize. So it emphasizes specialization over sampling. And this is a massive problem in sport. And I'd like to blame Malcolm Gladwell, but I think he actually has all the arguments in his text, but parents overlook them. And this 10,000 hour rule, which is true, but completely taken out of context in popular culture. So with a focus on specialization, we're failing the humanities, we're failing the larger ability to see the bigger world and to think about lessons and tools we can take from these many disciplines versus looking at them as part of our identity, right? If I don't specialize, if I don't only take classes about the human body and disease, then I'm never going to be a good doctor. When in reality, you should probably be reading philosophy and wrestling with sociology and the arts, and having a broad perspective. And so I think I think maybe, to your question, by over specializing, and we see this with a lot of colleges going all in on computer science and AI focused degree programs that lack ethics and morality and philosophy to understand the training modules. It's just focused on what can I do with this one thing, how can I be the best at this one thing, versus sort of reading broadly. And that's what I think David Epstein's book Range does a nice job capturing, is that actually the North Stars, the people that parents are trying to compare their kids to or point them to, the best of the best, for the most part, have really broad interests, broad backgrounds, and that way they're able to see the world from multiple perspectives. And a key life skill is they're able to collaborate with people who have different training versus just only interacting with specialists or only thinking that their worldview is right. And I'll share one example from the book. I think it was a sociologist. I might get their background wrong, but this scientist did a research study on his sabbatical, where he sat with research labs at universities, and he sat with multiple labs for like a year, and he found that could observe their problem solving and communication abilities. The labs that were full of specialists, so people that had only trained in that field, only thought about problems from a very, narrow point of view, really struggled with problem solving, whereas the labs that had people with a diverse background of training solved problems faster. And he said it was really interesting is some of these labs were having the exact same problems, and he had to be this research scientist that said, like, he saw a lab solve a problem a month ago and he couldn't tell the lab the answer, but he's watching these specialists just fail to acknowledge this other perspective, whereas this lab that had, a bunch of broad backgrounds solved it rather quickly. And so I think, the bigger focus on specialization fails to maybe equip people with these critical learning skills and these thinking skills that are so integral to solving problems in the workforce, in our communities, and even in our homes, how we raise our kids and think about our families.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and thanks for the book recommendation. I'll definitely, look into it. Um, what I've been hearing is interdisciplinarity, critical thinking, other critical like life skills. So now here's where it really gets interesting for me. Um, do you see AI potentially helping us here in becoming like more interdisciplinary, more like, more of critical thinkers, more of like critical listeners? Like, could we use technology to actually recognize and validate these non-traditional skills? Because right now, if you learned like project management, you're talking about like specialization, right? By organizing your family's immigration paperwork, um, that's just not showing up on LinkedIn, you know?
Yeah, I again, maybe a bias is, my training and the kind of work I do, I think is pretty anchored in developmental psychology and community psychology, um, and what we can't ignore from maybe our evolution is that we're a social creature and we need relationships to survive. So I do think that AI has a major role to play in how we complete tasks, how we can synthesize information without relationships to help us think critically about the results of AI, how the tool manifested what it's generating. Um, then I really fear that it becomes just another specialist in the room
Mm-hmm.
that we don't think critically about. Um, and of course, all this could change in 6 months. I don't know where this technology is going. The way I understand large language models is that it's this predictive
Mm-hmm.
algorithm that is generating something based on its database. It's not actually thinking. It's not complementing or you know being used as a secondary voice. It's kind of designed to please the the person, and to that end, the person is going to just generate ask it to generate information until the person is pleased, because there's nobody to debate with. I don't think it's capable of having an intellectual debate. And so that would be, I think, the rub is that if it can help synthesize, meeting notes, like how cool would it be for that researcher in those lab meetings to have had a transcript, you know, synthesized and sort of thematized, or maybe truncated, so that there's some, external evidence. I don't want to call it quantitative or objective evidence, but an external piece of evidence for that researcher to sort of think through what was in these meetings and why some groups solved problems and why others didn't. But I don't think it would be the beacon that would point that out. Um, and in my work with high school sport, the adults um, that are making the decisions that impact the young people, if they're if they can use the AI tool to reduce some of the workload so that they can focus on relationships, so that they can generate content and engagement as a way to bring people in to build relationships, then I think it would be good. I think humans have been fantastic over the last 40 years of believing the next tool is going to save them time. And really what we do is use our time differently. I think, and this I think comes from our search for meaning. I don't know that we're equipped to be lazy. I think people need to be doing things. We strive for meaning, and if we can find something that provides us meaning and relationships, we're probably going to be driven towards that. So AI I don't think will save us time and give us more leisure. I think it'll just, be like email, and it'll overrun things. And I'm also listening to this other book right now. It said something really interesting about AI. It said we take all this information, and we ask the machine to reduce it into an email, and then in that email we then blow it back up. And so we're really just like not doing anything, but shrinking and expanding information left and right. And so we're just trading data bits. We're not actually thinking and processing. And it was really a funny perspective to think about, how someone might spend an hour or whatever synthesizing, having AI reduce this thing, and then the recipient takes this outline and goes, okay, now I have to do all this work. It was just a really funny perspective. So I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. What is the name of the book? It sounds really interesting.
I'm listening to The Siren's Call by Chris Hayes. And at its core, it's a book about attention and where we direct our attention. And I think its central thesis is that we can really only pay attention to one thing at a time. And so, and I don't think he wouldn't take credit for this. Reviewing the information age as the attention economy and how we, where we spend our attention. It's super interesting, thought-provoking book.
Yeah, super relevant. I have been hearing about attention being the main currency these days. As you said, like attention economy. Like the more attention you can get from people, the more money you can make. Like that's basically how it has turned out to be. Okay, so let's zoom into the classroom itself.
Sure.
Given the tension between like meaning, purpose in life versus productivity versus like synthesizing, expanding information and like or wasting time or spending time on that. So there is a lot of tension, among like these different variables, and everything is sort of like vying for our attention. Like AI has our attention right now. Like, will it have our attention in the future? We don't know. But when we are zooming into the classroom itself, being educators, so you have got students walking in with all these incredible skills and experiences, but they're entering systems that, let's be honest, weren't like designed keeping them in mind. And now we are adding this layer of complexity where they need to be prepared for jobs that might not even exist yet. So how do we make this work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that I'm equipped to answer it. I think I think I guess I just come back to the sampling and pulling from many different perspectives so that we can think about the world from as many like to equip ourselves to think about the world and the problems we might face from as many vantage points as possible. And to that end, the jobs, we're not aware of the jobs that might exist because we're not aware of the problems that may need to be solved. And often, a lot of these problems are occur because of past actions, and so on and so forth. And so if we over specialize in our training, we're going to fail to be able to think about innovative solutions and draw things together. And so in the classroom, at least like from career readiness, maybe maybe I'll zoom into like what I see in the classroom. I would guess if I was in a classroom with 100 kinesiology majors, if they're all freshmen, 95% of them want to go into physical therapy and the other 5% want to be physicians. If they're all seniors, then we're looking at maybe 30 to 40% want to go into physical therapy, another 30 to 40% want to be physician's assistants. We still have a lot of students who want to go into med school or dentistry. And so I think about these folks that are going to be solving our healthcare problems. And AI could be a great tool to synthesize the research and identify, if I enter these symptoms, what are the 10 most likely things that it could be? But what AI can't do is the bedside manner and guide the person through a really difficult choice. What AI can't do is help the affluent person in their community be a better community member to think about the ways they can give back. And it can't, again, focus on relationships. And so I think the classroom becomes a place where we can try different relationship building techniques. We can try different communication styles. We can learn where information is located, how to access it, and how to synthesize and critically think about it, regardless of its source. So to that end, I would hope that the classroom becomes, even in the narrow space of the topic of the classroom, that we can broadly approach the problem that the classroom brings to the students. And if, I try to think about my classroom as an intervention, how are the students going to see the world differently on the other side? And so the medium or the focus of the course is really just the anchor point we've all agreed to. And yet and we can keep rotating around that anchor point to sort of think about it differently. So a class I teach on youth sport, the mission is to maximize the benefits of youth sport and minimize the detriments. Well, in order to do that, we have to know how the body works, how it responds to training, and especially for young people, what's safe physical activity. We also have to know what psychological safety is and how do we craft an environment that's psychologically safe. We have to recognize folks in those settings who might, not have the best interests of children in mind, all the way, up to folks that are committing crimes against children. And we also have to think about how do we be creative in that space. And so I think there's a place for AI. I think, the physician who's got a 6-year-old and they're going to coach baseball for the first time and they've never played, AI can design a practice guide. And what a great resource for the person who's never thought about it. But what AI can't do is motivate the kids to have fun. And so that person has to craft the environment. What AI can't do is tell you that but AI can tell you that there could be up to a 3-year difference in biological maturation in your group of 7-year-olds. AI can't keep them safe at practice. That's what you have to do. And so having AI generate multiple activities for that practice to run would be fantastic. AI can tell you how to modify an activity for a child with a physical or mental disability or an injury, but it can't do it for you. You've got to safely run that practice. And so I think what a great tool to help solve problems, but the human has to execute. And I think one story that's popping up, and I hope this isn't too much of a tangent. My grandfather worked for NASA after the Second World War, and it was a really interesting time in the American workforce and how we were advancing towards this goal, the space race. And so my grandfather joined the military before the draft, before he finished high school. And I think it was in order to have some autonomy in the service that he was providing. After he got out of the military, this was a time when, NASA was taking apprenticeships. And so he got a job without a GED at NASA, which I don't think would happen now in this over specialized world. And in fact, my grandmother, I think, wrote most of his papers to get his GED. But his job was solving problems. He was an engineer. He worked in the back of mission control, and this guy helped design the backpacks that were on the astronauts that touched down on the moon. He also helped train the chimpanzees that went up into space. And there's one story, and I don't know how true it is, but it was always passed down in our family. After they moved him from Virginia, where he was training in his apprenticeship, they moved him to Houston to work there for NASA. And all these scientists couldn't figure out what was wrong with the computer in Virginia. And so they flew my grandfather back to Virginia, man whose GED was written by my grandmother. And the problem with the computer was that it wasn't plugged in. And so you had all these computer scientists and engineers that couldn't figure this out. And, my grandfather walks in and plugs it in. And I think that, to me, as I'm thinking about specialization and sampling and problem solving and diverse teams, like, what a powerful example of the kid with the GED solves this big problem for NASA by just stepping back and going, how would I think about, the tradesman? How would the tradesman solve this issue? And then I fast forward to the scene in the movie Apollo 11 when the astronauts are stuck and the engineers are in this room. They dump the cardboard box. And this is the constraints. This is what these guys have up there to solve this problem. And they spend all night thinking about it. And how terrible would it be if it was only specialists who had never built anything or trained? Like, we'd lost those astronauts, So I think that's the power of the classroom, and in my bias view, the face-to-face classroom, where someone can share an experience, or we can watch a clip, or we can have AI generate something for us, and then we can respond from multiple perspectives. And this is why I like having majors, take my class from outside our department. This is why I like having students really think about the places they've been shadowing and the problems that they've been seeing. So what people have shadowed: dentists and physical therapists and physicians and physician's assistants. I even had a student who had an internship at the Body Farm on campus. And so they think about the world in different, they don't realize the breadth that they have. So I think we operate in a world where you have to be specialists. And when you give permission to think broadly, then the problem gives multiple spotlights on it, and you can maybe find different creative solutions. And AI can be a part of that creativity, but I don't think it should be the sole arbiter of what's right and what's wrong, because it's really just picking the next best letter mathematically.
100%. You talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, teaching as an intervention, which I love, classroom as an intervention. You talked about student motivation, agency, safety, and this amazing story about your grandfather. I mean, that really, puts all of this, put things in perspective, like who we are as humans. And you emphasize relationships earlier on, like what makes us human and what makes us part of the society is that we are connected to each other, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, and given all these skills and skill sets, life skills that we are talking about, and you're highlighting, why is that specifically important for students from underserved backgrounds? Like, what's different about their experience?
So I don't have a lot of experience working with the students in these communities, but I'll share two examples from my past research experience. And the one I mentioned earlier is this big youth sport organization that my lab was involved with. The kids, the coaches the kids that were assigned to these coaches, pure random. It was just you're 7 and you want to play basketball, there's 200 other 7-year-olds that want to play basketball. We can divide them into X number of teams, and here's the coaches, and you just get who you get. And in that particular project where they observed effective versus ineffective coaching, there was no difference in how much these coaches cared about the kids. The ineffective coaches and the effective coaches wanted to be there. And in the United States, youth sport is so dependent on volunteers. So I would try to never, discount somebody who's volunteering their time for young people. And so these effective and ineffective coaches both wanted the same thing. They wanted these kids to have great sport experience, and they wanted them to learn transferable life skills. And that was a big part of this whole organization. It was a big part of their mission, is how do we mentor young people, because they are from marginalized communities. The problem was that the ineffective coaches seemed to lack these social emotional skills themselves. They were more likely to have come from that neighborhood themselves. And so they viewed their role and their love for these kids as toughening them up. They had to protect them. And it wasn't a protection like a mama bear protecting the cub. It was, I need to make you as tough as possible and scared of joining a gang. That was their reality. Whereas the effective coaches loved the kids, wanted to equip them, but they would invest in a relationship and try to model an alternative path. They also believed that joining a gang was equally as likely, but they didn't view their role as protecting the kid and scaring them from that. They viewed their role as equipping the kid with critical thinking and relationship building and a positive role model who hadn't lived that life or wasn't doing that thing. The other opportunity I had with research in a similar city, both of these cities at the times that we were working with them were trading places as the most dangerous cities in the United States based on like homicides per capita and socioeconomic status. And we were doing a study about being physically active in nature and outdoors and coming at it from a place where the research shows that if you spend time in nature, it can de-stress you. There's an interesting study that with adults had people, they were told to go for a walk. One group could listen to music or do whatever they wanted. The other group was just told, hey, just listen to nature. It was the only primer. And the group that was told to listen to nature walked at a higher metabolic rate. So they walked with more vigor and they walked for longer. So they got better exercise and they enjoyed it more. So we're talking to these kids about exercising in nature, and they're from these communities. And one of the questions in the research was like, why would you not go outside? And something that really shook me to my core was the kids started listing the things that they were afraid of in nature. They were afraid of rabbits. They didn't like the cold, and they were afraid of the shootings. And for them, it was the same thing: a rabbit, a loose dog, a random gunshot, and the cold were equally reasons to stay inside. And it was so normal for them and so unlike my childhood that it was like, holy crap, this is a problem I've never encountered, and I don't know what to do with it. And I don't know that telling them to go for a walk outside is going to solve this problem. And being in nature might actually reduce stress from that environment. So for that group, it was more about getting out of their community and experiencing something new and forming positive adult relationships where accessing nature was not common or normal for their families. Whereas, in other groups that we looked at that lived in rural settings, it was just about motivation to get outside because they live next to the woods and the trails. And so to bring this back, I think, how do we help these young people? It's got to be the relationships where they feel psychologically safe to take, I guess, intellectual risks and to think about things differently, and equipping the adults and this is, in my class, I hope to motivate the adults to invest in their communities, to be the ones that are um, doing the coaching, to be the one. I often tell my students, I said, look, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to make money, you're going to have power, you're going to have influence. You are going to be asked to be on the board of these organizations. What can you do with that? What sort of power and influence can you bring when you are asked, because of the stature you're going to have in your community, to think about these bigger questions, and to recognize that not all families are like your family, and that you can really, think broadly. And so again, I think AI can help expand options, can help organize things, can help synthesize information, but it's really the human that has to make the decision, um, and the human that has to invest in the relationship consistently, for at least what we've seen, for those positive outcomes to really become salient and transferable, needs a positive role model.
Mm.
um, and I'll share one example from another study. When we asked these high school kids about life skills that they had learned from sport, one kid shared, um, he was complaining at practice about the quality of the tennis courts at his school, and the coach was like, well, do you want to fix this? Like, do you want to try to fix it? And the student's like, absolutely. And the coach says, I will help you, but you're going to lead it. um, and so this kid started asking, like, well, how do I do this? Like, well, you need to talk to the athletic director, you need to raise money. And so the coach became like the tool. Hey, come ask me questions and I'll point you in the direction, but you're going to own this. And what an amazing life skill experience for this young person to have had, where they led fundraising and petitioning and community and speaking and advocating, and then they got to own the success when they raised the money and were able to update the tennis courts, and the thumbprint that kid's going to have on every kid that comes through that high school for the next 10 years that gets to play on a higher quality court, versus the kids who said, yeah, I learned communication because my coach was so terrible at it. I learned that I can't do X, Y, and Z, but they couldn't talk about with any depth about why it was transferable. And again, that came from an adult making a decision to invest in the relationship and to consistently show up. The adult didn't have to do anything else. They didn't solve the problem. They didn't. I don't know how much fundraising they did themselves, but I think that's what's really exciting about the the power of relationships to really impact young people. And I don't know that AI can do it. I think it can play a role, if we approach it broadly.
Mm. Yeah, I'm hearing human connection, human relationships, centering those relationships in order to like generate like these transferable life skills. So it has to be human centered. So how do you take these, like how do we take these psychological insights and scale them up, especially when we are thinking about integrating AI or educational technology that could either amplify human connection or completely undermine it?
Well, yeah, I guess that's the question, is to actually. I think what you just said was brilliant, and I would love to ask that question in my classes. How do we use AI to amplify and not undermine? Um, and to approach that from philosophy and ethics, to approach it from developmental psychology, to approach it scientifically through program evaluation and intervention science, to understand both objectively and subjectively the experiences of what that tool may be doing or not doing. And so I think for me, that I think I'm actually really inspired by that question. I would love to bring that into the classroom myself. I don't know. I don't know. And I think my bias and my specialized training says that there's nothing a positive relationship can't do. And I recognize that there's probably some shortcomings there, because a positive relationship's not going to protect the young people from the shootings in their neighborhood. Um, it's not going to, you know, uh, protect every kid from bad actors in those settings that are committing crimes against children. And it might decrease those, right? I think there's one tragic case in a a sexual abuse scandal where the parents didn't believe the kid. They couldn't believe that the person the kid was talking about was actually capable of doing those things, and it ruined the kid's life. They were a victim over and over again. When the parents finally did realize it, it ruined their life and their relationships. And um, so I think to that end, like what looking at any data source, a child's stories, AI, the research we're reading, and asking that question that you framed: how does this amplify, and how might this undermine?
Mm.
Um, and I think that takes a broad skill set to then, that's like an internal debate. What is the positives of this thing? Oh, by the way, can you now undercut it? And I don't know that we do that as much in the system that is
Mm.
increasingly emphasizing the specialist. Um, and to bring that back to my college experience, I don't know that I'd be the teacher that I am if it weren't for these two classes that I really didn't want to take, that had nothing to do with my major, and yet they were really, really powerful.
Yeah. So there was a power cut, but I still have Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay. Oh no, I'm so sorry.
So you get to see like how it actually feels like to be in the field,
Yeah.
to be so close to the project site. So this is like these are the parks that it comes with. Um, let's talk about. I'm loving this conversation. We are almost towards the end of this chat, and really really enjoyed like what you have shared. A lot to think about. Let's talk about something that you have been experimenting with, gamification. I'm really really excited about that. um, Now I know some people hear gamification and think, oh, like it's just adding points and badges to everything. But you're doing something way more sophisticated. You have actually used these strategies in your kinesiology courses with students. And here's my question: so when you're working with students like who maybe don't have the latest gaming consoles or high speed internet at home, how do you make sure these approaches help rather than hurt?
Yeah, good question. So I think I've approached gamification in the classroom. Um, what appealed to me, or the bridge that was made, was when I saw it described from motivational theory, and particularly self-determination theory, which, oversimplifying and undermining its complexities, suggests that there are three basic psychological needs that we have towards motivation. We need to feel autonomous, we need to feel competent, and we need to demonstrate that competency, and we need to feel a sense of relatedness or connection. And from that end, I think I approach a lot of problems from that perspective: is, does the person feel like they have control? And so even with my kids, I'll present two options to them, both of which are things they have to do, or things that I'm comfortable, but versus opening it up. So we're saying, what do you want to do today? So make a decision. Here's two things we can do. They feel in control, but really I've already like shrunk the
Mm.
constraints. People have a need to feel competent and that they can demonstrate competency. And so I think when I give feedback to students, I try to frame it from that perspective, not so much what you did wrong, but here's how well you did it, and here's maybe what you could have done, like an opportunity. And so I give students the chance to revise their work, and that's sort of demonstrating that competency.
Mhm.
I don't know, and I haven't solved the problem of relatedness in the assessment or course design. I hope that comes from just being face to face. I think what So from that lens, I think the study of games and how games work typically have multiple components of that. Um, and so that changes in the classroom, in my bias view, from an experience where I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to lose as few points as possible, and every time I hand something in is a loss opportunity, right? If I get less than 100%, I'm now worse off than I was yesterday. And so I spend 16 weeks just fighting to stay, as close to that 100% as possible. And I didn't love that. I didn't think it was contributing to learning. And students that had a lower threshold cared less. And so gamification for me was able to flip that around, like you earn things up. Um, what I don't do, and I think some people do and have done well, is using games to teach. So I don't use gamified pedagogy. I don't play games to teach lessons. I think that exceeds my introvertedness. It exceeds how I run a class meeting. But as from an assessment perspective, I think it's been really helpful. And a couple of studies that we've done has showed an increased sense of competency and decreased like test anxiety. And I think that's pretty powerful. I also think, in one qualitative study we did, because to increase autonomy, I offer multiple assignments that I think all drive towards the learning objective. So the students is able to choose that. They're able to choose what grade they're going to get if they complete X number of tasks. And so I've had students tell me that they started taking that into their other classrooms. They write goals, they map it out, and I think that is hopefully equipping them with a transferable life skill that, you set a goal and you set short-term goals and you map it out and you have a plan, and you don't get so focused on the failure and you don't get so fixated on the single path that you can't adjust. And so my classroom has, adjustments, but it you fail yourself if you don't at least put together a plan. So from that end, I think adults that are running the environments, whatever that might be, and I'm thinking about environments that have young people in it. If we accept that there's some truth to this motivational theory, that if you can experience more autonomy, believe you're demonstrating competency, and you're able to form ties or connections or relationships, then I think if those three things become the tenets or the pillars of how an environment is run, it doesn't so much matter what the tech is. In fact, just recognizing what the constraints are and then moving within those constraints along those principles, I think the research shows that it's the end result is going to be a more internally felt motivational experience where they're more likely to return. And so from a pro-social perspective, and trying to think about things that are good across cultures, in my world, like more exercise. How can we make people want to exercise, feel good exercising, have choice in exercising? Because that helps our societies when we have healthy folks. When we have people that are driven to solve problems without huge external rewards, that's going to help our societies. And so so for me, gamification in the classroom became an experimental setting where I could try to zero in on those pillars and drive people towards the behaviors that I think result in learning.
Thanks for sharing. That's such a thoughtful approach. And you know what? Like this connects to something I've been wondering about. As we were saying before, the session started, or we were on live. Um, that I am currently, very, residing very close to the refugee camps, and working with the Rohingya refugee people. Um, I was just wondering, could game-based or interactive methods actually help close equity gaps for refugee students who could be some of them could be adults, right? And what makes these approaches work for these like really vulnerable populations, if not the most vulnerable population in the world, versus when they completely backfire?
Sure. I've seen there's an intervention. I guess I'd call it a program or programming in our literature. Um, it was coined and first put together by a guy named Dr. Don Hellison, who spent most of his academic career in Chicago and did a lot of intervention work in Southside Chicago. And again, a marginalized group, not refugee.
Mm.
Um, but his program is called Teaching Personal and Social Responsibility. And I've not used it in intervention, so I don't want to try to pretend like I understand all the intricacies. But a lot of it is based on some of this motivational theory, on giving kids autonomy and demonstrating competence. I have observed a colleague of mine use that programming with refugee children after being, put into a community in the United States. And so, for instance, she used this program in Lansing, Michigan, which had a large refugee population from the Congo and West Africa. Um, and what teaching personal and social responsibility is often anchored in sport and physical activity, because Dr. Hellison's training was as a physical educator and sociologist. So she was using basketball and soccer as the game, and then they would talk about how you demonstrate respect in basketball, how you demonstrate determination. And so to that end, with the population, if there is an identified goal, whether it's um, the the enculturation into a new community, whether it's figuring out the plan for tomorrow, how can you maybe use those principles of what we think the human psyche is drawn to feel pride and self-determination um, and the ability to pursue goals. Um, and I think it could be part of the solution. I also would hope that the individuals who have power and authority in those places are also using good goal-driven work and good social emotional skills to model and manage and make meaning of those situations. Um, but I don't know. I think it's such a complicated situation with so many layers of constraints. So I think it requires a really good mission, a really good set of core values. And not that I would ever compare my classroom to the environment that you're in right now, but as a representative sample, the closer I adhere to the principles of that motivational theory,
Mhm.
the more consistent that environment comes for the students that come in. And so I would argue that that is maybe the transferable piece, is how tightly can we adhere to a core value in those settings to help drive people towards a sense of self-determination and resolving and moving towards their goals, whatever that might be.
No, I love that. All right, Jet. I have got one final question for
Sure.
you, and I promise that we are wrapping up after that. It's
Yeah.
a big one.
Okay.
If you could wave a magic wand and redesign the entire future of education,
Yeah.
from the classroom to the job market, with marginalized students at the absolute center of your design, what is this one change you believe would make the greatest impact?
I think broad training at the impetus. So as you enter the education experience, you're trained broadly,
Mm-hmm.
with the capstone being sort of interdisciplinary problem solving. I think that, from what I've just learned from that book Range, what I'm learning in this book about the attention economy, I think, and again, own my bias, my own experiences, taking classes wildly outside my major. Um, I think that's the most exciting thing. And when I look at the folks that are in my lab, the reasons, other th- in addition to them being well trained and well positioned to be contributors and help me grow, they've overcome things, and so they've had to solve problems that maybe aren't embedded in kinesiology curriculum. So that would be
Mhm.
my magic one. Broad training at the impetus, and rather than moving, I think moving towards some specialization is important, but the capstone needs to be problem solving and working with a diverse set of trainees, solve those problems. I'm really inspired by your question. How do we amplify X and then not undermine, you know, Y? And so I think I'm gonna think about that for a long time. It, and what an amazing space that would be to be faced with that question with people from multiple perspectives, and how intoxicating would it be to have a classroom with engineers and philosophers and agricultural scientists, and say, hey, the kids in South Knoxville or in East Knoxville have this experience. What's one thing this group of 10 could do to improve it, and use your training, where it fit? And so the ability to recognize science and problem solving, approach these communities from multiple perspectives would be super exhilarating space to be in, and hopefully provides a training experience that they may replicate in their communities in the future. And like I said, I think about youth sports and the board of directors that are usually equipped with the most affluent, leaders in the community, physicians and bank managers and real estate. How do we solve the youth sport problem? How do we make the youth sport program that they're all working to better, and not throwing up my hands and being like, well, I'm only a doctor, I don't know. But like, well, here's the core tenets of my field that make for a good youth sport experience. What are the core tenets of your field? How do we layer in these constraints and then find where we can operate? I think that would be the magic one. Broad training to problem solving.
Love this broad training for problem solving. So thank you so much, Jed, Dr. Jed Blanton, everyone. This conversation has been really, really energizing. This conversation has me thinking about how we can build educational systems that truly see and value every student's potential, especially as we navigate this like new landscape, AI driven transformation of work. And that's exactly what we are here to explore on air. The future of learning and work is not just happening to us, as Dr. Blanton has, very, specifically pointed out. We are actively creating it. The question is, who are we creating it for? So thanks for joining us today. If this conversation sparked something for you, I'd love to hear more about it. And if you know someone who is doing innovative work in education, equity, or the future of work, send them our way. Until next time, keep questioning, keep building, and remember the future of learning is what we make it. Thank you so much, Jed.